Sir, please.
I'm on my way to chemotherapy. My appointment's in 30 minutes.
Step out of the vehicle, slowly. Why are you breathing like that?
I can't breathe. I have stage 3 cancer. I just left the hospital yesterday.
Please save it. You were swerving back there. You on something?
This is my treatment tag. I can't
Stop
miss this
resisting
session.
or you will be...
Agent Harris stopped a cancer patient wearing hospital wristbands on a sun-drenched roadside and ordered her to step out of her vehicle, warning that failure to comply would lead to her immediate arrest. Even though the woman was visibly weak from illness and her oncology appointment was just minutes away, Harris treated her medical emergency like it was his personal interrogation. What he didn't know was that the woman was protected by federal civil rights laws and that every biased command was being recorded by his own body camera. That short encounter would later turn into a $1.2 million lawsuit and criminal consequences that ended Harris's career in disgrace. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The woman at the center of this incident was Kahila Moore, a 39-year-old black woman who worked in logistics and was fighting for her life against stage 3 cancer. She had undergone a grueling round of treatment weeks earlier and was currently on a strict medical clock for her chemotherapy infusions. On this day, Moore was driving toward the city's main oncology center after a morning of preparatory tests. Like many other patients battling terminal illness, she needed to reach her appointment on time to ensure the treatment remained effective. Kahila Moore's life had become a series of calculated risks and measured breaths. At 39, she was no longer just a logistics manager or a mother. She was a fighter in the middle of a brutal, high-stakes war against stage 3 cancer. The disease had tried to claim her body, but her spirit remained anchored by the rigid schedule of her oncology team. Every 3 weeks, the battle intensified, and today was the most critical day yet, Cycle 4. In the world of aggressive chemotherapy, Cycle 4 wasn't just another appointment, it was the tipping point. Her doctors had been clear that the efficacy of the entire treatment plan relied on the cumulative punch of these infusions. Missing the window by even an hour could allow the dormant cells to regain their footing, undoing months of agonizing progress. As she stepped into her SUV, the physical toll of the previous rounds was etched into her movement. She was pale, her strength diminished by the very medicine saving her, and her head was wrapped in a soft scarf that covered the evidence of her struggle. On her wrist, the plastic hospital bracelet from her morning blood work felt like a heavy shackle of reality. It was a badge of her current existence, a signal to the world that she was fragile yet fighting. She adjusted her seat, checked her watch, 9:15 a.m., and pulled out of her driveway. She had exactly 45 minutes to reach the oncology center, a drive she had practiced in her head 1,000 times. The stakes were higher than just her own health. For Kahila, survival meant being there to see her children grow, to return to the career she loved, and to reclaim the identity that cancer had stolen. She drove with a hyper-focus, her mind running through the logistics of the day, the infusion, the recovery, the hope for a clean scan. The road ahead seemed clear, a straight line toward a second chance at life. She was a woman who had planned for every variable, accounted for every side effect, and steeled herself for every needle prick. She was doing everything right. She was on time, she was prepared, and she was determined. But as the blue and red lights suddenly flickered in her rearview mirror, the careful rhythm of her survival was about to be shattered by an obstacle she never could have prepared for. The deep-seated bias of a man with a badge who saw a suspect where the rest of the world saw a patient fighting for her last breath. Agent Harris stood by the driver's side window, his hand resting with practiced intimidation on his holster, while the morning sun glinted off the badge that Kahila Moore had always been taught to respect. But as she sat there, the pale fabric of her head wrap stark against her skin, respect was being rapidly replaced by a cold, paralyzing dread. She wasn't thinking about the speed limit or the lane change Harris claimed was the reason for the stop. She was thinking about the chemical cocktail waiting for her at the oncology center, a treatment that had to be administered at an exact window to remain effective. "Officer, please," Kahila began, her voice thin but steady as she held up her left arm. The white plastic hospital wristband from her morning blood work was impossible to miss. "I am a stage 3 cancer patient. I have an appointment for chemotherapy in 20 minutes. If I am late, they lose the infusion slot, and my treatment gets pushed back weeks. My life literally depends on me getting to that building." Horace didn't even glance at the wristband. Instead, his eyes drifted toward the back seat, narrowing as if he were looking for a ghost. "You're moving awfully fast for someone who's sick," he countered, his tone dripping with a skepticism that felt deeply personal. "And you're shaking. People only shake like that when they've got something to hide. Why don't you go ahead and step out of the vehicle for me?" "I'm shaking because I'm terrified and I'm ill," she pleaded, pointing to the oncology paperwork sitting on the passenger seat. But Harris wasn't interested in documentation. He leaned closer to the open window, sniffing the air with an exaggerated flair. "You know, I'm picking up a very distinct odor coming from this cabin," Harris stated, ignoring her medical documents entirely to focus on a fabricated suspicion. "It smells like you've been trying to mask something." "Is there marijuana in this car, Kahila? Or maybe something stronger? You came from that pharmacy down the block, didn't you?" The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't a traffic stop. It was a stakeout. He had seen a black woman leaving a specialty pharmacy and had already written a script in his head where she was a dealer rather than a patient. The medical urgency she was describing was, to him, nothing more than a desperate junkie's excuse. "It's a specialty pharmacy for my pain medication and nausea suppressants," she cried out, the ticking of the dashboard clock sounding like a funeral march. "There are no drugs in here except what my doctor prescribed to keep me alive. Please, look at the papers. Call the clinic. Just let me go." Harris simply stepped back and pointed to the shoulder of the road. "Step out, now. I'm not asking again. We're going to wait for the canine unit to clear this smell you've got going on. If you're as innocent as you say, you've got nothing to worry about, regardless of your appointment." In that moment, the badge didn't represent safety. It represented a wall standing between a woman and her only chance at survival, built entirely on the foundation of the color of her skin. The heavy silence of the roadside was shattered by the sharp, persistent ringing of a cell phone on the dashboard. Kahila Moore's eyes darted to the screen. It was the oncology clinic. She knew what that call meant. In the world of aggressive chemotherapy, on time isn't a suggestion, it is a physiological requirement. The infusion chair was waiting, the specialized drugs were likely already mixed, and the medical window was rapidly closing. "Officer, please," she gasped, her voice thinning as the stress of the detention began to manifest as physical tremors. "That's my doctor. They are calling to see where I am. If I don't get there in the next 10 minutes, they have to give my slot to someone else, and I lose my cycle." Agent Harris didn't even look at the phone. He stood with his hand resting near his holster, his gaze fixed on the interior of her car with a predatory intensity. "Don't touch that phone," he snapped, his voice a cold wall of authority. "You're in the middle of a continuous investigation. You aren't making or receiving calls until I say so." Kahila watched the screen glow with the clinic's caller ID until it finally went dark, a missed call notification appearing like a death sentence. She felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with her illness and everything to do with the sheer powerlessness of the moment. She tried once more to appeal to his humanity, pointing again to the hospital band on her wrist, but Harris remained unmoved. To him, the medical urgency was merely a distraction tactic used by someone he had already profiled as a criminal. Instead of a quick resolution, Harris decided to double down. He ordered her to remain seated and keep her hands on the steering wheel while he walked back to his cruiser to call for a canine unit. As the minutes ticked away, 10, 15, then 20, Kahila sat frozen, watching the digital clock on her dashboard. She was witnessing the sabotage of her own survival. The arrival of the canine unit signaled the final expiration of her treatment window. By the time the dog began its walk around her vehicle, the 10 a.m. deadline had passed. The specialized proteins and chemicals prepared for her blood were now being discarded, and her chair at the clinic was being sanitized for the next patient. Agent Harris had successfully maintained control of the scene, but in doing so, he had effectively stripped a dying woman of her best chance at a cure. As the phone rang a second time, a final follow-up from a nurse she would never reach, Harris simply stared through the glass, his expression as vacant as the suspicious evidence he was so desperate to find.